The saloon door slammed open. A man flew backward through it and hit the frozen mud of the street. He did not get up. Inside the Copper Stag, 19 men stopped laughing at the same instant. A voice low and cold as river ice came from the doorway. "I said let go of her hand." The man on the floor was Rufus Crane. His lip was split. His yellow teeth had blood between them. He was trying to reach for the Colt on his hip, but his fingers were not working right yet. Above him stood a mountain man, 6'4", beard thick with snow, buffalo hide coat stained dark at the hem, eyes the gray of winter stone. His right hand rested on his own revolver, but he had not drawn it yet. He did not need to. Every man in the saloon understood that if that hand moved 1 inch, 3 of them would be dead before the lamp stopped swinging. Behind him in the doorway stood a woman. She was 27 years old. She weighed close to 200 pounds. She was holding a canvas sack with 3 glass jars of blackberry preserves inside. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from something she had been holding back for 27 years and was about to let out. She looked down at Rufus Crane on the frozen ground. She did not smile. She did not speak. She simply walked past him out into the falling snow, and the mountain man followed her, and the door of the Copper Stag swung shut behind them. And nobody in that saloon ever laughed at Eleanor Whitfield again. The narrator's voice comes in quiet, steady, the voice of a man who has seen 80 winters and remembers this one like it was last week. That was the winter of 1886, Bitter Creek, Colorado. The woman in the doorway was my grandmother. The mountain man was the only father my mother ever knew. Before that night, my grandmother had spent 27 years being told she was worthless by every person in that town. Her own father, the women at the church, the men at the saloon. She believed them. For 27 years she believed them. After that night, she rode 40 miles up into the Sawatch Range with a stranger. She did not take a single thing with her except her dead mother's recipe book, a tin of old tea, and a letter she had not yet read. The letter would change everything, because inside that tin was a secret her mother had kept for 27 years, a secret about her real father, a secret about the mountain man who had just stood up for her in that saloon, a secret that would 3 months later nearly break her. This is her story, and his story, and the story of the winter they built a life out of what everyone else had thrown away. My name is Thomas Mercer. I am telling you the story the way it was told to me. And the way it was told to me, it starts with 3 jars of preserves. The snow came down slow that night in Bitter Creek, Colorado, the kind of snow that falls without wind, the kind that settles on a man's shoulders and waits. Eleanor Whitfield stood at the edge of the main road. She was 27 years old. She carried a canvas sack, and inside that sack were 3 glass jars of blackberry preserves, her mother's recipe, the only thing in this world that was still hers. She had been standing there for 11 minutes. The lantern above the door of the Copper Stag burned yellow through the falling snow. From inside came laughter, men's laughter, the sharp kind, the kind that knew someone was about to be cut. Eleanor breathed out. Her breath made a small white cloud that drifted up toward the lantern and vanished. She weighed near 200 pounds. She had known it since she was 15, the year the boys in the schoolhouse started pointing. She had known it every day since. She knew it now, standing in the snow, wearing her mother's old wool coat that no longer buttoned over her chest. But there was cough medicine on the shelf at Dobbin's store. $2. Her father's lungs had been rattling for 3 weeks. If she did not bring home $2 tonight, he would die before spring. And she did not love him. But she had promised her mother she would not let him die on the floor. So she put her hand on the door of the Copper Stag, and she pushed. The warmth hit her first. Whiskey, tobacco, the sour smell of men who had not bathed in a month. The laughter stopped. Every head turned. She counted without meaning to. 19 men, 4 women at a corner table, a bartender wiping a glass with a rag that was dirtier than the glass. Then the voice. Lord Almighty! It came from a thin man at the bar. Rufus Crane, buyer of hides, yellow teeth, face like a narrow blade. Boys, look at what wandered in from the pasture. The laughter started again, different now, a harder kind. Eleanor walked to this bar. She did not look left. She did not look right. Her boots left wet prints on the sawdust floor. She placed the canvas sack on the wood. Is Mr. Dobbins here tonight? The bartender looked at her. He did not speak. A woman at the corner table called out, Minerva Crane, Rufus's wife. red hair going gray, dressed too tight at the shoulders. Eleanor Whitfield, did you come to sell us lard? The four women at the corner table laughed together, a shared laughter, rehearsed, the sound of women who had practiced cruelty for so long they no longer remembered why. Eleanor opened the sack. She placed 3 jars on the bar, dark glass, sealed with wax, the blackberry inside the color of old wine. Preserves, she said. $2 for the 3. Rufus Crane walked over. He took his time. He had a way of walking that meant everyone had to watch him walk. He picked up 1 jar, held it to the lantern light. $2. Yes, sir. $2 for jam. Preserves. Same thing. It is not the same thing. The room went quieter. A woman who corrected a man, in the Copper Stag, at night. Rufus smiled, his yellow teeth. He set the jar down, but not gently. I will give you 50 cents. $2. 50 cents. Then I will take them home. She reached for the jars. Rufus put his hand over hers. His hand was warm, greasy, heavy. Now, Eleanor, do not be rude. A tall man near the card table, Curtis Beaumont the carpenter, slapped his knee and called across the room. She has spine, Rufus. Shame it is the only thing about her that is not soft. The men roared. Eleanor did not move. She did not move her hand out from under his. She did not move her eyes from his. She did not move the muscle in her jaw that wanted to tremble. Something inside her chest was making a sound, not a breaking sound, something quieter, the sound of a rope being coiled, slowly, patiently, the sound of a woman deciding something she had never let herself decide before. Rufus leaned in. His breath smelled of rye whiskey and onion. You know what your problem is, Whitfield? You think you are worth more than you are. He took her hand off the jar. He bent her fingers back, not hard enough to break, hard enough to hurt. Get out of my saloon. Then the door opened behind them, and the air changed. The man who walked in was tall like a pine. His shoulders filled the doorframe, brown beard thick and untrimmed, a long coat of buffalo hide stained dark at the hem, snow on his hat, snow on his shoulders. He smelled of pine smoke and cold stone. His eyes were gray. They went directly to the bar, to Rufus Crane, to Eleanor's hand bent back on the wood. He did not speak at first. He simply walked across the room, slow, each boot a soft thud on the floorboards. The men moved out of his way without being asked. The women at the corner table stopped laughing. Minerva Crane put down her glass. He stopped 2 feet behind Rufus. Let go of her hand. The voice was not loud. It was low. The voice of a man who did not ever need to raise his voice because he had already learned a long time ago what his hands could do when his voice was not enough. Rufus turned. He saw who had spoken. His face changed. Gideon Mercer. The name spread through the saloon like a draft through a cracked window. Men sat up. A card fell from someone's hand. I heard $2, Gideon said. I heard it clear from outside. Rufus let go of Eleanor's hand. Gideon, this is not... I do not care what this is. I heard $2. The woman is trying to pay her. Rufus did not move. Pay her, Crane, and then you are going to apologize. A long silence. Rufus Crane reached into his vest pocket. He took out 2 crumpled bills. He placed them on the bar. Eleanor did not move to take them. Apologize, Gideon said. Rufus swallowed. His throat moved. I am sorry, Miss Whitfield. He said it to the floor. Louder. I am sorry. Gideon did not look satisfied, but he looked like a man who knew the difference between winning a fight and starting one. He nodded once. Pick up your jars, ma'am. Eleanor picked up the $2 first, then the 3 jars. She placed the jars back in the canvas sack. Her hands were shaking. She hated that they were shaking. She willed them to stop. They did not stop. She walked to the door. Behind her, Rufus Crane's voice came back, small, ugly, meant only for the men near him but loud enough for her to hear. Take your fat self back to the hills, woman, and do not come back. The laughter started again. Nervous laughter this time. The laughter of cowards trying to reclaim a room. Eleanor opened the door. She stepped into the snow. The door of the Copper Stag closed behind her. Eleanor stood on the wooden plank sidewalk. Her breath came out in hard white clouds. The snow had thickened. She could barely see across the street. She did not cry. She had not cried in front of those people for 12 years, and she was not going to start tonight. But her chest hurt. A deep hurt. The kind that was not about tonight. The kind that was about every night before tonight. She looked down at the $2 in her gloved hand. The bills were damp with sweat. She folded them into her coat pocket. She tightened the cord on the canvas sack. She began to walk. 4 miles home. In this snow. In the dark. She took 3 steps. A voice from the shadow beside the saloon wall. "Miss Whitfield?" She stopped. Her hand went to the knife at her belt before she knew she had moved it. Gideon Mercer stepped out from the dark. He must have left the saloon through the side door. He stood under the eave of the porch, snow on his shoulders, hat low over his eyes. "Did you want me to go back in there and do for him?" She looked at him. She looked at him a long time. "No. I would not mind. I know." He tilted his head slightly. "Then what do you want?" Eleanor took a breath. The cold burned the inside of her nose. She thought about her answer. She thought about it carefully. Because she had never been asked by anyone in 27 years what she wanted. "I want him to live long enough," she said, "to see the day I do not need him to be sorry." Gideon Mercer was silent. Then he did something she would remember for the rest of her life. He laughed. It was not a loud laugh. It was a quiet, startled sound, like a man hearing his own voice after a long time of not hearing it. Later, many years later, Eleanor would learn that this was the first time Gideon Mercer had laughed in 7 years. "What is your name?" he said. "Eleanor Whitfield." "I am Gideon Mercer. I live on the mountain, 40 miles north. I need someone who can cook, keep a house, mind a stove and a trap line when I'm gone." "Gone where?" "Winter and spring I trap. I leave for days at a time. The cabin needs tending." "What would I be paid?" "A roof, food, a third share of the pelt money." She looked at him. His gray eyes did not move from her face. He was not looking at her body. He was not looking at her weight. He was not looking past her or through her. He was looking at her, like she was a real person, like she was a question he was trying to answer correctly. "Why me?" "Because you stood in that room 10 minutes and did not cry, and you did not run. I have known men who could not do that." "I have nothing to bring." "Bring yourself. That is enough." She stood in the snow. The lantern above the saloon creaked on its iron hook. Somewhere down the road a dog barked twice and stopped. A horse somewhere snorted in its stable. And Eleanor Whitfield, who had spent 27 years in this town being made small, looked at the mountain man in the shadow and said the only word she had left. "When?" "Before sunup tomorrow. I will be at the fork of the North Road, where the creek bends. If you come, we ride. If you do not come, I understand." "I will come." "I know you will." She turned. She walked into the snow. Gideon Mercer watched her go until she vanished into the white dark. His jaw tightened once. He put his hand against the cold wood of the saloon wall. He felt for the first time in 7 years a thing he thought was gone forever. He wanted to live through the winter. Eleanor's home was a small wood-frame house at the edge of Bitter Creek. The porch leaned. The roof had been patched so many times it was more patch than roof. Smoke came weak from the chimney. She had banked the fire before she left. She climbed the 2 steps. She opened the door. Ezra Whitfield, her father, was asleep at the table, his gray head on his folded arms, a whiskey bottle almost empty near his hand. His breath came out wet and slow, the sound of a chest full of winter. She set the cough medicine on the table beside him. She placed one of the $2 bills beside the medicine. She did not wake him. She went into her mother's room. She had kept it exactly as it was the day her mother died. The bed made, the Bible open on the small table to the page where her mother had last been reading. Psalm 23, the Valley of the Shadow, her mother's wooden comb on the nightstand, her mother's tin tea canister on the shelf above the bed. Eleanor sat down on the mattress. For 4 years she had not opened that tea canister. She did not know why. Perhaps because as long as it stayed closed, her mother was still in the house. She reached up. She took it down. The tin was old. The lid stuck. She worked it with her thumbs until it gave. Inside were 3 pennies, a pressed violet flower brown with age, and a folded envelope. Her name was on the envelope. Cordelia's handwriting. Small, careful. The penmanship of a woman who had finished school once long ago in Ohio. Eleanor opened the envelope. Nell, my darling, I am writing this while my hand is still steady. Before I close this letter, I will hide it where only you will find it. You are not Ezra's child. Your true father was a man named Jonah Thaddeus Mercer. He and I loved each other when I was 18 in Ohio. He went west in the spring of 1858 to look for gold. He promised me he would come back and marry me when he had enough for land. I was already carrying you, but I had not yet written to tell him. And then the war came. Jonah enlisted for the Union. He was killed at Antietam, September of 1862. I received the news through a cousin of his in Ohio. I married Ezra in the fall of 1859 when I knew Jonah would not come home in time. I needed a name for you. Ezra knew the truth from the beginning. He did not hate you. He hated me because I never loved him enough. And you were the one who paid. I am sorry. If you ever find Jonah's people, his half-brother was named Gideon 10 years younger. I do not know where he went. If you find them, tell them I love Jonah until the end. You deserve to know where you came from. Your mother, Cordelia Halloran Whitfield. Eleanor read it 3 times. Her hands were shaking, but not the way they had shaken in the saloon. A different shaking. The shaking of a woman whose whole life had just turned 90 degrees without her permission. Gideon. There were many men named Gideon in the West. It was a common name. Preachers liked it. Mothers of boys born in the 1840s liked it. It meant nothing. It meant nothing. She told herself that twice. She folded the letter. She placed it in the inside pocket of her coat where her mother's letter would be against her skin. She stood up. She went to the narrow closet in the hallway. She took down the carpet bag that had been her grandmother's. She put 2 dresses in it. Her mother's wooden comb. The Bible open to Psalm 23. The pressed violet. The tin tea canister now holding the letter and the pennies and nothing else. A pair of wool stockings. Her father's old hunting knife that her mother had hidden from him when the drinking got bad. She found a scrap of paper and a pencil. She wrote 3 words. I have gone. She placed the note under the whiskey bottle where he would see it when he woke. She looked at her father one last time. The gray at his temples. The tremor in his sleeping hand. The lungs that rattled. She did not feel love. She did not feel hate. She felt nothing at all, and that felt like the mercy she had been waiting 27 years to be given. She walked out the door. The snow had stopped falling. The sky was clearing in the east, the first gray of morning. Eleanor Whitfield walked north toward the bend in the creek where a stranger had said he would wait. He was there. 2 horses, a gray mare and a red roan, breath steaming in the cold. Gideon Mercer standing between them, adjusting a strap on a saddlebag. He looked up when he heard her steps. He did not smile. He did not need to. You came? I said I would. Most people say. I am not most people. He looked at her carpet bag. That is all. That is all that was worth carrying. He nodded. He understood that answer. She saw it in his eyes. He was a man who understood answers like that. He helped her up onto the gray mare. Her name was Juno, he told her. Calm, patient, good for someone who did not ride. He adjusted the stirrup for her. His hands were careful. He did not touch her leg longer than he needed to. He mounted the roan. He called the roan Tinder. 40 miles, he said. 3 days. We will take it slow because you have never ridden distance. If you hurt, you tell me. Do not hide it. A sore that gets hidden becomes a wound. I understand. The weather should hold. But if a storm comes, we ride in the storm. There is no stopping between here and there with safe shelter. I understand. One more thing. She waited. If you decide at any point on the road that you do not want to go through with this, you say so. I will turn the horses around. I will bring you back. No shame in it, no cost, no anger. Do you understand? She looked at him. The mountain man in the gray light, snow on his shoulders. A man who had laughed for the first time in 7 years the night before because of something she had said. I will not change my mind. All right. He clicked his tongue. The horses stepped forward. Behind them, Bitter Creek began to wake. A rooster somewhere, smoke rising from a chimney, a lamp lit in a window. Eleanor Whitfield did not look back. The first day nearly broke her. She had never ridden more than an hour in her life. By noon, her thighs were raw. By dusk, her spine felt welded in place. When Gideon helped her down from Juneau at the first camp, her legs buckled and he caught her by the elbow. He did not comment on her weight. He did not grunt. He simply held her steady until her legs remembered themselves. He built the fire. He cooked beans and salt pork in a tin skillet. He handed her the larger portion. She was too tired to argue. She ate it. They did not speak until the fire was low. Then, in the quiet, Eleanor asked a question she had been holding since that morning. "Why do you live alone on the mountain?" Gideon looked into the coals for a long time. Then he said, "I had a wife. Her name was Amity, and a daughter. Her name was Ruth. She was 6 years old." He did not look at Eleanor. Spotted fever, the winter of 1879. Took them both in 10 days. I was not home. I was on a trap line in Wyoming. When I came back, they had already been in the ground 3 weeks. My neighbor had buried them. He did a good job. There were stones and wood markers. He had even painted their names. Eleanor did not speak. I walked into my empty house, and I left the next morning. I have not been back to that valley since. I came south. I built the cabin where I live now. I have not spoken to a woman besides saying good day at a trading post in 7 years. He finally looked up. Until last night. Eleanor's throat was tight. She said nothing because there was no right thing to say. Gideon Mercer seemed to understand that because he nodded at her silence as if she had said the right thing by not saying anything at all. She lay down on her bedroll. She watched the stars through the pine branches. She thought about Amity, about a 6-year-old girl named Ruth who would now forever be 6 years old, about a man who had not spoken to a woman in 7 years who had laughed last night in a dark saloon doorway. She thought about her mother's letter folded against her chest inside her coat. She did not ask him that night, not yet. The second day was worse than the first. Her body had stiffened in the cold. Every step of the mare was a small punishment. She did not complain. Gideon did not ask. At midday they crossed a frozen creek. The ice cracked under Juno's hoof and Eleanor gasped, but Gideon had already turned in his saddle, his hand reaching for her bridle, steady, calm, prepared. The ice held. They crossed. "You did well," he said. "I did nothing. You did not scream. That is well." She almost smiled. That afternoon the country changed. The aspens thinned, the pines thickened, the peaks of the Sawatch Range rose ahead of them, white and cold and enormous, and Eleanor, who had never seen mountains like these, felt something in her chest loosen. That night at the fire, Gideon handed her a tin cup of bitter coffee. They sat in silence for a long time. Then he said, "Tomorrow afternoon we will reach the cabin. Before we do, I want you to know something." She waited. "You will owe me nothing. If you stay a month and decide to leave, I will pay you a month's share of pelts and take you down to Leadville myself. If you stay a year and leave the same, I am not buying anything with this arrangement. Do you understand?" She understood more than he knew. "I understand." "Good." He did not look at her when he said it. He looked at the fire. She realized in that moment that Gideon Mercer was a man who had watched a woman be treated as a thing to be bought and sold his whole life, and he had decided somewhere deep that he would not be a man who did that. Not even by accident. Not even in the smallest way. It was the kindest thing any man had ever done for her. She closed her eyes and slept without dreams. They came up out of the last pass on the afternoon of the third day. The cabin sat on a flat bench of land against the north shoulder of the mountain. Small, squared timber, a chimney of river stone, a roof of cedar shakes patched and weathered. Behind it a stand of lodgepole pine. In front a slope of meadow grass already whitening with first frost. And past that impossibly far, the Sawatch Range. A thin line of smoke from the chimney. "I banked the stove before I left," Gideon said. "Should still have coals." Eleanor said nothing. She could not say anything. She had never in her life seen a place she wanted to stay. Every room she had ever lived in had been a room she was counting down the days to leave. This somehow was different. This felt like the first place that had not been waiting for her to apologize. He helped her down. He opened the cabin door. Warmth rolled out. Inside one room. A stone fireplace on the east wall. A cast-iron stove in the corner. A heavy plank table with 2 chairs. A narrow bunk along the west wall. A second, smaller bunk she had not expected in the opposite corner. Shelves along every spare inch of wall. And the shelves were full of books. She stopped in the doorway. "You read?" "Winters are long," he said. A man can read or a man can lose his mind. I chose reading, mostly. She walked in slow. She touched the spines. Dickens, Emerson, a volume of Tennyson, the Bible, a battered copy of Walden, a stack of issues of Harper's Monthly from 3 and 4 years back, a medical manual from Philadelphia, a book on the raising of bees. He watched her. "You can read whichever you like, when you have time." "I can read," she said quickly. "My mother taught me, before." "I guessed that." "How?" "Because you speak the way a woman speaks who has read. Words have weight in your mouth. I noticed it the first time you opened yours." She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. He showed her the cabin, the stove, the woodpile, the spring behind the house where water came up clear even in winter, the small smokehouse, the pen where a single gray mule stood chewing hay. The mule's name was Patience. Gideon said it without irony. He told her she would take the west bunk, the larger one. He would sleep on the smaller east bunk. "It is not proper," she said. "Proper would have been me giving you my own bed and sleeping in the stable. But the stable is cold and I would like to be useful in the morning. This is the second bunk. I built it 2 years ago after a fever one winter when I thought I might die and wanted somewhere for a visiting man to sleep and tend me. No one came. The bunk is here. You take the other. We are both under one roof, but we are separate. That is all." She nodded. He left her to unpack. The first week nearly broke her again. She burned the first pot of beans she tried to cook. The second pot she oversalted. She dropped a clay cup and it shattered. She slipped on the frost by the spring and cut her palm on a rock. She tried to chop kindling and the axe head turned wrong in her hand and the blade bit her boot and nearly took a toe. Gideon did not scold. He did not praise. He watched. He would show her the correct way to do a thing. Once. Quietly. Then he would leave her to do it herself. If she failed, he did not intervene. He let her fail. He let her learn. On the 5th night she burned a pot of elk stew. The elk he had shot 2 days before with a single clean shot and butchered in the snow outside the door. The stew was a week's worth of meals. She left it too long on the fire while she was splitting kindling, and when she ran back in the bottom was black, and the smell of char was everywhere. She set the pot down on the table. She sat on the floor in front of the stove. She did not cry. She was past crying. She was simply empty. Gideon came in with an armload of wood. He smelled the burn. He looked at the pot. He looked at her on the floor. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he sat down on the floor beside her, not touching her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him through the wool of his coat. "In my first year up here," he said, "I put a pot on the fire and went outside to fix a loose shingle. I forgot about the pot. 2 hours later I came back and the water was gone. The pot was cracked straight down the side. It was the only cook pot I had. I had to ride 3 days to Leadville to buy another. 3 days in October's snow, to buy a pot." She looked up. "You are making that up." "I am not." "Why not?" "Because I was ashamed. For the first week I did not even tell the man at the trading post how I had cracked my pot. I said a horse had stepped on it." She laughed. It was not a full laugh. It was half a laugh, half a broken sound. But it was the 4th laugh of her adult life, and it came from somewhere deep, and she did not know she had it in her. Gideon nodded slow. He stood up. He took the burned pot outside. He came back with fresh snow and salt pork and began to cook quietly, not commenting, not performing kindness, just doing the thing that needed to be done. She watched him from the floor, and she thought, "This man is the kindest man I have ever met. And if my mother's letter is telling the truth, he might also be my blood. And I do not know what to do with either of those things yet." The 6th week on the mountain the weather turned hard. A 3-day blizzard pinned them inside. Gideon taught her to card wool. He taught her to oil a rifle. He taught her to sharpen a skinning knife on a whetstone at the right angle with the right pressure. Her hands were rough now. Her palms had calluses. The skin of her knuckles had split from cold and was healing back harder. She had lost weight. Not much, perhaps 15 pounds. But her body felt different. Not lighter, stronger. Her shoulders sat wider. Her back did not curve when she walked into a room. She did not apologize for breathing. On the morning of the 3rd day of the storm, with the wind still howling and the snow still thick, she climbed up to clean the top shelves of the cabin. Dust had gathered. She wanted to earn her keep. She pulled down books one by one. wiped them with a damp rag, set them back. She pulled down a cloth-wrapped bundle from the back corner of the top shelf. It was heavy. She brought it down carefully. It was a book or a bound set of pages wrapped in oiled cloth. She unwrapped it on the table. The cover was cracked brown leather, charcoal stains on the edges. The book of a man who had used it hard, then put it away and never come back for it. She opened it. Sketches. Charcoal drawings, delicate and strong. A mountain peak she did not recognize. A pine tree with a split trunk. The face of a young woman, hair down, laughing. A pair of boots by a door. A horse's head. A cabin. A river. She turned to the first page. Someone had written in a clear, careful hand, "Property of Jonah Thaddeus Mercer, Saguache Range, summer of 1858. Eleanor sat down slowly at the table. Her mother's letter was in the tin tea canister on the shelf above the west bunk. She had read it twice since arriving. She had put it away. She had not spoken of it. Jonah Thaddeus Mercer, the name of her father, the name in her mother's letter, the same name, here, in this cabin, in the hand of a man who had drawn sketches on a mountain in the summer before the Civil War, 10 years before she was born. She looked up. Through the small window in the cabin door, she could see Gideon outside in the blizzard breaking up ice at the water pump, his shape dark and broad in the white. She looked back down at the sketchbook. She turned another page. Another face. A young man. Self-portrait. He had drawn himself in a hand mirror, probably. The face had her cheekbones. The face had her jaw. The face had her eyes. She had never seen a photograph of her real father. She had never seen a painting. She had been told her whole life that her face came from her mother's people in Ohio. But this young man in the sketch had her face. Her hands began to shake. She closed the sketchbook. She wrapped it back in the oiled cloth. She climbed up and returned it to the top shelf exactly where she had found it. She did not tell Gideon, not that night, not the next week, because she did not yet know what she would do with the answer. She lay in her bunk that night and listened to him breathe across the room. Slow, steady, alive. And she thought, I have left a house belonging to a man who was not my father, to live in a cabin belonging to a man who may be my blood. She did not sleep until the first gray of morning, and when she finally did, she dreamed of a young soldier in a blue uniform in a cornfield in Maryland, turning to look back at a woman he had loved before the war, a woman in an Ohio doorway, and the soldier's face was her face, and the soldier did not know he had a daughter. And somewhere far away, the sketchbook on the top shelf of a cabin in Colorado waited for that daughter to find it 24 years later on the third morning of a blizzard, with the kindest man she had ever known splitting ice outside her door. The mountain kept its secrets, for now. By the middle of January, Eleanor Whitfield had been on the mountain 6 weeks. 6 weeks was not a long time in the life of a woman, but it was long enough for a body to change if the work was hard enough. And the work was hard. She could split kindling now without slicing her boot. She could build a fire in the cast-iron stove with damp wood and make it catch on the first match. She could walk the half-mile to the spring at dawn, break the ice with the iron bar Gideon had made her fill 2 buckets, and carry them back up the slope without setting them down once. She could skin a rabbit. She could gut a trout. She could load and fire the Winchester leaning against the cabin wall, and on a still morning at 30 yards, she could put a ball through a tin can 7 times out of 10. Her hands were brown now. Her knuckles had thick ridges of skin where the cold had split them and healed. Her shoulders had broadened from the axe work. Her waist had not shrunk much, maybe 15 pounds gone, but the fat on her had settled into muscle, and the muscle sat under the fat like stone under earth. Most of all, she walked different. She did not know it yet. You never see your own walk. But Gideon Mercer saw it. He saw it the way a man sees the first crocus push up through melting snow. She no longer entered a room sideways. She no longer ducked her head when she passed through a doorway. She no longer apologized for the sound of her own steps. They did not speak much in those weeks. They did not need to. He rose before her and lit the stove. She made the morning coffee and boiled oats. He checked the trap line. She tended the mule and the cabin. At dusk they ate at the plank table. He read by the lamp on one side. She read by the lamp on the other. Sometimes their eyes would meet across the table and one of them would nod, and that nod would say what a whole evening of conversation would have said in another house. She had not spoken of the letter. She had not asked about the sketchbook on the top shelf. She told herself every night that she would ask him tomorrow. Every night the tomorrow moved one day further down the road. Because this was the first home she had ever had, and she was afraid of what the question might break. The storm came down out of the north on a Tuesday evening. It was not a normal snowfall. It was the kind of storm that the old trappers called a white killer. The wind rose first through the afternoon, the kind of wind that makes the pines lean and groan like men in pain. Then the temperature dropped. Then the snow came not falling, but driving horizontal, thick as flour through a sieve. By dark, the world outside the cabin window was a wall of white. Gideon bolted the door. He fed the stove until it glowed orange. He hung a second oil lamp from the rafter above the table. He did not need to tell Eleanor that no one should be outside in this. She knew. They ate salt pork and beans. They drank bitter coffee. He read the Tennyson. She read Walden. The wind howled against the logs of the north wall, and the cabin held. It was somewhere near 10 o'clock when they heard the knock. Eleanor lifted her head from the book. Gideon set down the Tennyson. 3 knocks, then silence, then 3 more. The sound of a fist hitting wood that was almost too frozen to strike. Gideon rose. He took the Winchester from the wall pegs. He did not raise it. He simply carried it the way a man carries a tool he hopes he will not need. "Stay behind the stove," he said. "Gideon." "Behind the stove, Eleanor." She moved. He unbolted the door. The wind slammed it open against his shoulder. Snow blew in a great wall of it, and for a moment Eleanor could see nothing but white. Then a shape collapsed through the doorway and fell on the cabin floor. A small shape. A child. Gideon caught her before she hit the boards. He lowered her gently. Eleanor was already moving across the room around the stove, kneeling beside them. The child's lips were blue. Her lashes were crusted with ice. She was perhaps 11 years old. Her face was narrow and brown-eyed, and she was trying to speak, but her teeth would not stop clacking. "Mama," she said. "Where?" Gideon said. The girl pointed out into the dark. Gideon looked up at Eleanor. Only one look. A full sentence in one look. He grabbed his buffalo coat off the peg. He wrapped the girl in the wool blanket from his own bunk and pushed her into Eleanor's arms. "Warm her slow, not fast. Wet cloths on her hands. Get her out of her boots. Do not put her by the stove. Across the room. Slow. Go." He went. The door slammed behind him. Eleanor carried the girl to the west bunk. She laid her down. She pulled the child's boots off. The feet inside the wool stockings were ice cold but not yet black. Eleanor thanked God with a silent thanking she did not know she still had in her. She wrapped the child in dry wool. She soaked rags in lukewarm water and wrapped them around the small frozen hands. "What is your name, sweetheart?" "F. Flora." "Flora, how old are you?" 11. "Flora, how long was your mama out there?" I do not know. We fell in the creek, before dark." She hit her head. Eleanor closed her eyes for one breath. Then she opened them and went to work. Gideon came back through the door 40 minutes later. He carried a woman over his shoulder. His beard was stiff with ice. His eyebrows were white. He had found her 200 yards below the cabin off the trail, unconscious in the lee of a fallen spruce. Another hour and she would have been dead. "On the floor," Eleanor said. "Not the bunk. We need to work on her." He laid the woman down by the stove. Not too close. Eleanor had moved the low table aside. The woman was perhaps 32. Dark hair matted with snow and frozen blood. A deep bruise at her temple where she had struck the ice when the creek gave way beneath her. Her breathing was shallow. Her skin was the wrong color, but her pulse at the throat was there. Thin, tired. But there. "Cordelia," Eleanor whispered without meaning to. Gideon looked at her. "My mother's name," Eleanor said. "She taught me this. The fever that took her at the end. I watched her nurse neighbors before it took her. Wet rags. Broth. Watch for the color of the lips." "What do you need?" "Yarrow. You have dried yarrow. On the shelf above the stove. Bring it. And the willow bark. And the whiskey." He brought what she asked. She worked until dawn. She did not sleep. She did not eat. She made a poultice of the yarrow warmed in whiskey and pressed it gently to the head wound after she cleaned the ice and dried blood from the split skin. She brewed a tea of willow bark for the fever she could already feel rising in the woman's forehead. She laid Flora down on the east bunk, Gideon's bunk, and covered her with every blanket in the house. She kept the stove fed. She kept the water hot. Every 20 minutes she checked the pulse at the woman's throat and the color returning to the child's fingers. Gideon did not leave. He did not speak. He watched her work. He had seen Army surgeons at Fort Reno in 1875 who had not worked with the calm and the certainty that this woman who had cooked her first stew 6 weeks ago and burned it was working with now. He saw her, and he understood something he had not understood before. She had been made for this. Not for the kitchen in Bitter Creek, not for the sidewalk in front of the Copper Stag, not for 27 years of being told by small men what a large woman was allowed to be. She had been made for this moment, and all the years of being told she was nothing had only been the long waiting room before this door opened. At dawn, the woman's eyes fluttered. At dawn, her lips, which had been the color of blue slate, began to turn pink. Eleanor sat back on her heels. She had been kneeling 4 hours. Her knees would not straighten without pain. She did not care. "She will live," she said quietly. "Yes," Gideon said. "She will." He reached down. He placed his hand on Eleanor's shoulder. Just for a moment. The first time he had touched her since he had helped her off the horse 3 days after they met. Then he took his hand away. He went outside to chop more wood. The woman's name was Rebecca Ainsley. The girl was Florence, Flora, her only child. They had been running from Denver for 11 days. Rebecca could not tell the story for the first 3 days. She slept. She woke to sip broth. She slept again. Flora would not leave her mother's side except to help Eleanor at the stove. Flora was a quiet child who moved like a small ghost who had clearly learned a long time ago how to not make noise in a house. On the 4th night, Rebecca was strong enough to sit up in the bunk. Eleanor had braided her dark hair back. The bruise at her temple had gone green and yellow at the edges. She was still a beautiful woman. Eleanor noticed this without jealousy. She noticed it the way a person notices the carving on an old wooden box. Something made carefully. Something damaged, but still standing. Gideon had taken to sleeping in the small back room where he stored traps and skins. He said nothing about it. He had simply moved his bedroll. That 4th night, after Flora was asleep beside her mother, Rebecca spoke. "You saved my life." "My mother taught me. I only remembered." "You saved my life." "All right. I need to tell you what we are." Eleanor sat down on the floor beside the bunk. She folded her hands in her lap. "Tell me if you want, not if you do not," Rebecca told her. Her husband was Barrett Ainsley, a banker in Denver, owner of a controlling share in the Colorado First National, the second largest national bank west of the Missouri. A man who sat in a front pew at the Methodist Church on Sundays and who beat his wife on Wednesday and Saturday nights for 12 years. He had not beaten her in the way a man beats in anger. He had beaten her in the way a man beats a horse he is training, calmly, methodically. Never the face, because the face would show. Always the ribs, the back, the thighs, places a dress would cover. She had run 3 times. He had found her 3 times. The last time he had brought her back from her sister in Cheyenne, and he had held her head under water in the copper bathtub 4 times until she swore to God and to him that she would never run again. Flora had watched through the crack in the bathroom door. Rebecca had known from that night on that she was going to have to do more than run. She had spent the next 16 months copying documents from Barrett's locked desk 1 page at a time late at night when he was out at his club. She copied ledgers, transfer records, 2 sets of books. She did not fully understand what she was copying, but she knew she needed enough of it to threaten him, and she knew where he had been nervous enough to keep things hidden under a loose floorboard in his study. She had finally understood what she had when she stumbled 6 weeks ago onto the entries marked WDC. That was Ainsley's private shorthand for War Department, Colorado. Union Army pension disbursements, quartermaster transfers, money that the federal government had placed in his national bank for payment to widows and veterans and active soldiers at Fort Logan. He had been taking from it, small amounts, for years, tens of thousands of dollars. She had copied everything. She had sewn the copies into the lining of a coat and left the coat with her sister in Cheyenne. Then she had told him on a Wednesday night before his hand could land that if he ever touched her again, the documents would go to the United States Marshal in Denver the next morning. He had not believed her. Not at first. He had tested her. He had locked her in the bedroom for 2 days without food. She had not broken. On the third day he had let her out, and she had told him quietly that she had written instructions with her sister, that if any harm came to her or to Flora, the coat would be opened and carried directly to Marshal Oliver Hatfield at the Federal Building on Arapahoe Street. And Barrett Ainsley, for the first time in 12 years of marriage, had looked at his wife with something that was not contempt. He had looked at her with fear. He had told her through his teeth that she could leave, that she could take the girl, that if she ever opened the coat, he would find her and he would kill her slowly. But she could leave. So she had taken Flora and ridden north, meaning to reach her sister in Cheyenne. But the snow had come down hard in the pass above Leadville. The ice on Horseshoe Creek had given way. Her horse had panicked. She had hit her head on the frozen edge. Flora somehow had pulled her out and gotten her onto the horse and led them blindly up the wrong trail for a day and a night, and by the grace of a God, Rebecca no longer fully trusted, they had come freezing and nearly dead to the door of a cabin in the dark. "I do not know why we lived," Rebecca whispered. "We should not have. We should be dead." Eleanor was quiet for a long time. "Maybe," she said, "you lived because Flora pulled you onto that horse. And she pulled you onto that horse because she had watched you for 12 years refuse to give up. A child learns what she sees, and she saw a mother who would not lie down." Rebecca began to cry. She cried without sound the way women cry when they have trained themselves not to wake the man in the next room. Eleanor took her hand. She did not squeeze. She only held it. For a very long time neither of them spoke. This was the still moment of the story. The fire in the stove was low. It made a soft red glow through the iron door. Flora slept curled against her mother on the bunk. Gideon was out behind the cabin checking a trap line that did not really need checking, giving the women the house. The wind had stopped. The only sounds were the stove and the breath of the sleeping child and the slow breathing of two women who had learned in the last week that the other one knew. After a long time, Rebecca spoke. Her voice was very quiet. "Do you know what the funny thing is? Tell me. For 12 years I believed I was not good enough for him. I believed I deserved it, because I could not cook what he wanted, because I talked too much at dinner, because I did not look the way I had looked on our wedding day. I believed I had earned it, Eleanor. I believed it." Eleanor did not answer right away. The stove popped. A spark snapped against the iron. "I believed I was a burden my whole life," Eleanor said. "For 27 years. I believed I deserved to be laughed at. Because I was heavy. Because I was plain. Because my mother might have been happier if I had never been born. I believed all of it. Do you still believe it?" Eleanor thought about that question. She thought about it for a long time. "No." "What do you believe now?" Eleanor looked at her hands. The rough brown hands, the split knuckles, the calluses, the hands that had just brought a woman back from the edge of a frozen death. "I believe," she said slowly, "that this body carried me through 27 years of hell, and it is still here. It never gave up on me. Not once. Not when they laughed at it. Not when they called it names. Not when my own father looked at it and saw his dead rival. It kept me alive. It kept me standing. It deserves my gratitude, not my apology." Rebecca let go of her hand. Then she reached up and she took Eleanor's face between her palms, the way a mother takes the face of a child, and she pressed her forehead against Eleanor's forehead. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saying that out loud. I have never heard another woman say it, in my whole life." They sat like that for a minute or more. Two foreheads. One fire. No sound. Then Rebecca lay back on the pillow and closed her eyes, and Eleanor stayed by the bunk until she was sure the woman was asleep. Outside through the window, Eleanor could see Gideon coming back up the slope, snow on his shoulders, his lantern swinging low. He saw her face through the glass. He stopped. He lifted the lantern a little. She lifted her hand in answer. That was all that passed between them. It was enough. Rebecca and Flora stayed 3 weeks. By the end of the first week, Rebecca could walk to the table for meals. By the end of the second, she was helping Eleanor with the bread and the mending. Flora, who had arrived a ghost, had begun to run. She chased the gray mule around the pen. She climbed on Gideon's knee in the evenings and asked him to teach her the names of stars. He taught her Orion. He taught her the Pleiades. His voice when he spoke to her was the voice of a man who had once had a daughter. Eleanor saw it. She said nothing. On the last morning of their visit before the ride down to Leadville, where Gideon had arranged a mule train to carry them safely on to Cheyenne, Rebecca sat with Eleanor at the table. Flora was outside with Gideon saying her goodbye to the mule. Rebecca reached into the small carpet bag that was the only thing she had carried out of Denver. She drew out a silver brooch. It was shaped like a small oak leaf, no larger than a thumbnail, set with a single seed pearl. "This was my grandmother's. It came from Edinburgh in 1840. My sister has nothing like it, and I want it to be here." Rebecca: "No." Eleanor: "Yes. It is too much. You gave me back my life, and my daughter's life. A silver leaf is not too much. A silver leaf is not even close to enough." Rebecca placed the brooch in Eleanor's palm and closed Eleanor's fingers over it. "If you are ever in trouble," she said, "sell it. Do not be proud. Sell it and feed yourself. Promise me." "I promise. If you are ever not in trouble, keep it. And when a woman comes to your door who has lost everything, you give it to her. That is how this works now. Do you understand?" "I understand." They held each other. They did not cry. They had cried enough. Gideon rode down with them. 3 days to Leadville. 3 days back. Eleanor was alone in the cabin for the first time in nearly 3 months. She used the silence. She sat at the table. She laid her mother's letter in front of her. She climbed to the top shelf and took down the oiled cloth. She unwrapped it. She placed Jonah Thaddeus Mercer's sketchbook on the table beside her mother's letter. She sat there with both of them for a very long time. When Gideon came back on the 6th day at dusk, she was waiting. He came through the door tired. He hung the buffalo coat on the peg. He saw her at the table. He saw the sketchbook. He saw the letter. He did not pretend not to see. He took off his hat. He placed it on the peg beside the coat. He walked to the table and sat down across from her. The lamp was low. The stove was warm. The cabin smelled of cedar smoke and the stew she had kept on the back of the stove for him. "You have had questions," he said. "A long time." "Yes. Ask." Eleanor slid the sketchbook across the table toward him. "Who was Jonah Thaddeus Mercer to you?" Gideon Mercer looked at the leather cover. He did not pick it up. "My older brother," he said. "Is he living?" "He was killed in September of 1862 at the Battle of Antietam, 8th Ohio Infantry. He was 27 years old. I was 16. I have not drawn a breath in 24 years that has not had his name somewhere underneath it." Eleanor slid her mother's letter across the table next. "Read this." He read it. He read it slowly. He read it twice. The second time his eyes came back to the name Jonah Thaddeus Mercer and stayed there for what felt like a long time. His jaw tightened. His right hand resting on the table closed into a fist. It opened. It closed again. It stayed closed. He set the letter down. He looked up at her. "Cordelia," he said. "Cordelia Halloran, your mother." "Yes." "Ohio." "Yes." Jonah spoke of her to me, the summer before he left for the West. I was 15. He was 23. He sat on the porch of our father's house in Springfield, and he told me that when he had enough gold to buy land, he was going back to Ohio to marry a girl named Cordelia Halloran. He said her hair was the color of wheat in August. He said she had a laugh like a small bell. He paused. He went west in the spring of 1858. He sent letters twice a year. The letters slowed after the war began. The last letter came from Washington City in August of 1862. He had enlisted with an Ohio regiment because he said a man from Ohio should fight for Ohio. 3 weeks later, he was dead in a cornfield in Maryland. Gideon looked down at his closed fist on the table. He never knew. No. He never knew he had a daughter. No. Gideon closed his eyes. For 30 seconds he did not move. When he opened them, his gray eyes were wet. One single tear had escaped down into his beard. He did not wipe it. "You are his," he said. "You have his eyes. I saw it the first night outside the saloon, and I would not let myself see it." Eleanor's hands were shaking. She placed them flat on the table to still them. "Then what am I to you, Gideon Mercer?" The air in the cabin was very still. He answered her directly. "You are my brother's daughter. You are my blood." Eleanor did not answer. She stood up from the table. She walked to the door. She opened it. She walked out into the snow without her coat. Gideon did not follow. He sat at the table with his brother's sketchbook and the letter of a woman he had never met, the woman his brother had loved and died loving, and he put his face into his hands, and he stayed that way for a very long time. Outside, Eleanor stood in the meadow. The stars were out. The Sawatch Range was a dark wall of jagged silver against the sky. Her breath came out in sharp clouds. She was cold. She did not feel cold. She had been told all her life that she had no family, that she had been a burden to a mother who died too soon and a father who drank, that she was alone in the world. And here on this mountain in this cabin, she had found the brother of the father she had never met, her uncle, her blood. The only man who had ever been kind to her without asking for anything in return was her blood. She did not know what the feeling in her chest was. It had hope in it. It had grief in it. It had the terrible ache of things that cannot be. She had, without admitting it to herself, begun to notice how his eyes looked at her across the lamp at dinner. She had, without admitting it to herself, begun to wonder whether one night he might cross the small space of the cabin and sit on the edge of her bunk, and she would let him. That was over. That was over before it had begun. She stood in the snow until her feet ached through her boots. Then she went back inside. Gideon had not moved from the table. "I need time," she said quietly. "I know. I cannot. I cannot look at you properly right now. I know. I do not want you to leave. I will not leave. I will sleep in the back room with the traps, for as long as you need. You take the cabin. Thank you. Eleanor." She looked at him. "I am glad you are his, and I am glad you are here. Whatever else we are to each other, whatever shape this takes, that is the first truth. Everything else we will learn." She nodded once. She went to the west bunk. She did not sleep. 3 days later, Gideon Mercer left the cabin before sunrise. He took only the red roan tinder and a small pack of food. He did not tell her where he was going. He left a note on the table that said only, "Back in 5 days. Do not worry." Eleanor read the note. She fed the mule. She cooked for one. She read Tennyson. She sharpened the skinning knife 3 times. She walked the trap line carefully the way he had shown her. She brought back 2 pine marten. She skinned them herself. She stretched the hides on the frames. She did not know it then, but Gideon had ridden 2 days down to the county seat at Leadville. He had gone to the Lake County clerk's office. He had paid the small filing fee to pull the birth registry records from Springfield, Ohio, that had been mailed west with his family when his father had moved to Colorado in 1874 and had been filed forgotten in the Leadville archive. He had asked the clerk for 2 documents. The first was the birth record of Jonah Thaddeus Mercer, born March 14, 1835, Springfield, Ohio. Father Nathaniel Silas Mercer. Mother Mary Elizabeth Thorne Mercer. The second was his own. Born September 22, 1845, Springfield, Ohio. Father Nathaniel Silas Mercer. Mother Prudence Claire Hendricks Mercer. 2 different mothers. 2 different mothers. He paid the clerk for certified copies. He rode back through 2 more days of hard snow. He came into the cabin at dusk on the 5th day. He was cold and unshaven, and he stank of horse. Eleanor was at the stove. He did not speak. He walked to the table. He set the 2 papers side by side. He placed a lantern over them. He stepped back. "Read," he said. Eleanor read. She read the first one. She read the second one. She read them again. She looked up at him. "Your mother, Prudence Claire Hendricks, my father's second wife. Jonah's mother. Mary Elizabeth Thorne. She died when Jonah was born. Childbed fever. My father remarried 10 years later. To my mother." Eleanor sat down slowly at the table. "So you and Jonah. We're half-brothers, same father, different mothers. We grew up in the same house and called each other brother because we were brothers in everything that mattered. But in the blood, Eleanor, in the blood of the mother line, we were not the same." He stepped closer. He placed his finger on the document. "You are the child of Jonah and Cordelia Halloran. You carry Jonah's blood. You carry the blood of Mary Elizabeth Thorne, his mother. You carry the blood of Nathaniel Mercer, our father. But you do not carry a single drop of the blood of my mother, Prudence Hendricks. None. That line does not come to you." He looked up at her. "By the laws of the territory of Colorado, and by the canon of the Methodist Church under which I was baptized, The blood relation between you and me is a half-uncle to a niece, which is a relation the law and the church recognize as close. But it is not the same as a full uncle. And across 3 generations with a removal through the mother line, it is a relation that both the civil law and the church permit to marry. Eleanor stared at the papers. Permit. Permit, Eleanor. The law and the church permit. I checked with Reverend Wainwright at the Methodist conference in Leadville the month before we met. It is not the common kind of marriage. But it is a marriage the church will bless because the blood between a half-uncle and a niece separated by a remarriage 2 generations back is no closer than the blood between second cousins. And second cousins marry in every county in this territory. I asked because I needed to know. Not for you. For me. I needed to know what was possible long before I knew there was any reason to ask. He paused. I am not asking you anything tonight. I am not asking you anything tomorrow. I rode 2 days and back because I needed to know what was true. I needed you to know what was true. Whatever you decide to do with this, you will decide as a woman who knows, not as a woman who is guessing. Eleanor did not look up from the papers. Gideon. Yes. Go to sleep. You are half frozen. All right? In the back room still. For now. Yes. I need to sit with this. Yes. He went to the back room. He did not eat. He fell onto his bedroll in his clothes and was asleep before the lamp in the main room was turned down. Eleanor sat at the table with the 2 birth records and her mother's letter and her dead father's sketchbook open to a self-portrait of a young man with her face. She sat there until the fire in the stove went down to coals. She did not cry. She did not smile. She simply sat, a woman of 27 years, and let herself understand for the first time in her life that the world had not been built against her on purpose. It had only been built badly. And in the badly built world, there were sometimes against all likelihood small doors that opened. This was one of them. She was going to need time to walk through it. But she was not going to close it. For 6 weeks after that night, they did not speak of it. Gideon slept in the back room. Eleanor kept the west bunk. Between them, during the days, nothing changed on the surface. He checked the traps. She ran the house. They ate at the plank table. They read by the lamp at night. He did not touch her. He did not reach for her. He did not look at her across the table with any question at all in his gray eyes. He let her lead the pace, and the pace she chose was slow. But something had shifted. She watched him now. She watched him in ways she had not let herself watch him before. The way his hands moved when he oiled a trap. The way he paused to listen before speaking as if he were sounding out the right word in a quiet room before he said it out loud. The way he stopped at the doorway every morning before stepping out into the snow and took a single long breath as if the mountain were a person and he was greeting her. She watched him with Flora's memory too. The way he had taught the girl Orion. The way he had not flinched from a child's laughter. A man who had lost a daughter and had kept the room in his heart for another one. In March, a young fawn wandered into the meadow below the cabin. Its hind leg was badly broken, caught in something, maybe a snare, maybe a fall. It could not run. Gideon went out to put it down, as was merciful. Eleanor stopped him. Let me try. Eleanor, let me try. He let her try. She set the leg with strips of willow bark and linen. She moved the fawn into the mule pen so Patience could keep it warm. She fed it warm oats and water. The fawn let her. It was too weak to refuse. She named it Juniper. 3 weeks later, Juniper stood on its own. 6 weeks later, Juniper limped, but it walked. Gideon watched her work with the animal one afternoon, her hands gentle, her voice soft, and he said nothing. But she saw his face when he thought she was not looking. He looked like a man watching his brother's daughter do his brother's work. In late March, the first melt began. On the evening of the first day, it rained instead of snowed. They sat at the table after supper. The cabin smelled of the wet pine coming off his coat. She spoke first. You can move back to your bunk. He looked up. Not because of anything I have decided about us, she said. Only because the back room is cold and damp now, and I do not need you to punish yourself for a thing you have not done. You are sure? I am sure. All right. He moved his bedroll back to the east bunk that night. They slept for the first time in months under the same roof in the same room 10 feet apart in the lamplight. And in the dark, in her own bunk, Eleanor Whitfield, daughter of Jonah Thaddeus Mercer and Cordelia Halloran. Whitfield listened to the steady breathing of the only man on earth who was her blood, and she understood without words that she was home. She did not know yet what shape that home would take, but she knew the mountain had kept her, and she was going to keep the mountain. The mountain changed in April. The snow did not leave all at once. It left in pieces. The meadow below the cabin turned from white to patchwork, the first brown grass showing through like a man's skin through a worn shirt. The creek behind the cabin broke its ice with a sound like distant thunder. Mornings Eleanor would stand on the porch with a tin cup of coffee in her hands, and she would watch the mist rise off the slopes, and she would feel a thing in her chest that she did not yet have a name for. Peace, perhaps. She was 27 years old, and she had never felt it before. Gideon Mercer rose early that spring. He did not speak much, but the not speaking was different now. It was a quiet that included her. He would come in from the trap line at dusk, set his rifle on the pegs by the doorknob once at her across the room, and she would hand him a bowl of whatever she had cooked. They had learned, the two of them, to live inside their quiet the way other people lived inside their chatter. They slept 10 feet apart under the same roof. They did not touch. But something had loosened in the air between them the way a rope that has been tight for months finally eases when the weight comes off. He looked at her sometimes across the plank table in the lamplight, and she looked back, and neither of them said anything, and that too was part of how they were learning. Juniper the fawn walked nearly clean now. She had a small limp, and she would always have it, but she could run. Most mornings Eleanor would find her asleep in the mule pen, curled against Patience the gray mule, and the two of them would lift their heads at the sound of Eleanor's step, and Juniper would come to her for a piece of dried apple. Eleanor would sometimes stand at the pen rail and think, "I have saved a thing that should have died. I did that. These hands did that." She would look at her hands. They were not beautiful hands. They were the best hands she had ever had. On the 7th morning of April, Eleanor came out to the porch with her coffee and saw a single rider crossing the meadow below the cabin. She set the cup down on the porch rail. The rider was alone. A woman. Coming up the trail at a trot that was too fast for a tired horse on thin snow, which meant she was riding with the kind of urgency that did not care about the horse. Gideon. He came out of the cabin in his shirt sleeves, coffee in one hand, his eyes already narrowed on the shape below. "Rebecca," he said. "No Flora. No Flora." Rebecca Ainsley reached the top of the slope and slid off the horse before it had fully stopped. Her hair had come loose from its pins. Her face was not white but gray. Her coat was buttoned wrong. Eleanor went down the porch steps to catch her. Rebecca did not fall. She gripped Eleanor's arms with hands that were trembling. "He has her." "Where?" "Denver. He has Flora. He took her off the street in Cheyenne 6 days ago. I was inside the butcher's. When I came out, she was gone. A telegram reached my sister's house the next morning. From him. From Barrett." Rebecca drew a folded paper from her coat pocket and pressed it into Eleanor's hand. Eleanor opened it. The message was one line typed in the careful capitals of a Western Union clerk. "Bring yourself home, or I send the girl to St. Agnes Reformatory in Missouri. Stop. Have 14 days. Stop. Barrett." Eleanor read it twice. "St. Agnes. I know what happens to girls in that place, Eleanor. I know because I had an aunt who was sent there at 13 and came back at 17 and hanged herself in her uncle's barn a month later. He is not sending her to be disciplined. He is sending her to be destroyed. He is using her as a knife on my throat because he thinks I will come back and give him back the documents and the power. Will you? No? Then what?" Rebecca's knees finally went. She sat down on the porch step. She put her face in her hands for 3 seconds. Then she took her hands away, and she looked up, and Eleanor saw something in her face that Eleanor had not seen before in any woman. It was the face of a woman who had finished being afraid. "I am going to Denver. I am going with the documents. All of them. I am going to marshal Oliver Hatfield at the federal courthouse on Arapahoe Street. I am going to lay the copies on his desk. And I am going to tell him that my husband has stolen federal army funds from the widows of Union soldiers for 7 years, and that he has kidnapped my child, and that the only thing between him and a federal prison cell is the time it takes a United States Marshal to saddle a horse. You cannot go alone." I know. A woman walking into that courthouse alone against a man like Barrett with a story like this will be laughed out by lunchtime. I need a witness. I need someone standing beside me. I need someone whose word will carry weight. She looked past Eleanor to Gideon on the porch. Eleanor did not turn around. "We are coming," she said. "Eleanor, we are coming." Behind her, Gideon spoke one word low and flat. "Yes." They left the cabin at noon. Gideon moved like a man who had been waiting a long time for this ride without knowing it. He packed the saddlebags in 40 minutes. Dried meat, a tin of coffee, the Winchester for him, the Colt for Eleanor, and a double-barrel shotgun that he had not taken down from above the door in 4 years. He checked the action on all three. He loaded the shells into cloth bandoliers. Eleanor watched him work. She said, "You were a soldier." He did not look up. "I was 16 when Jonah died. I was 17 when I enlisted. I served the last year of the war with the 14th Ohio, same regiment my uncle served in. I went where the family name was known. I have not carried a rifle for the purpose of aiming at a man since Appomattox. I would like to keep that record, but a child is not a record." "No, she is not." He looked up then. "Eleanor, if this goes the way it could go, there are men in Denver who will come at us in a way I have not had to answer since 1865. I need to know that you understand." "I understand." "Then mount up." They rode down the mountain with Rebecca between them. 4 days. The first day was hard. The second was harder. Rebecca did not weep. She rode like a woman made of wire. At night by the fire she would not sleep. She would stare at the coals. She would whisper her daughter's name just once before lying down. On the third day they came through the pass above Bitter Creek. The town lay below them in the late afternoon light. Smoke from chimneys, a wagon on the main street, the white clapboard steeple of the church, the long, low roof of the Copper Stag. Eleanor reined Juno to a stop. Gideon stopped beside her. Rebecca stopped behind them. Eleanor looked down at the town that had made her small for 27 years. "I need to go in," she said, "for supplies, for the ride to Denver. We will need more than we have." "Eleanor, and I need to go in because I need to walk through that town as the woman I am now. I need to see them, see me." Gideon did not try to argue. He only said, "I will be 10 steps behind you, never more." "Thank you." They rode in. The first person to see her was a boy of about 12 sitting on a barrel outside the livery. He looked up. He did not recognize her for a moment. Then he did. His mouth opened. He slid off the barrel and ran down the street toward the Mercantile, shouting something Eleanor could not hear. By the time she swung down off Juno in front of Dobbin's store, the word had traveled. Curtains moved in upstairs windows. A woman crossing from the post office stopped in the middle of the street. 2 men on the porch of the barber shop stood up. Eleanor tied Juno to the post. She took her time. She lifted the Winchester from the saddle scabbard and she slung it across her back by the leather strap. The Colt stayed on her hip. She wore riding trousers under a long wool skirt, a man's canvas coat, her mother's brooch at her throat, and a wide-brimmed hat that Gideon had given her for the spring sun. She walked up the 3 wooden steps to the Mercantile. She opened the door. A small brass bell rang above her head. Mr. Dobbins looked up from behind the counter. He was old. She had forgotten how old. His hair had gone entirely white in the years she had been gone. He squinted at her through small round spectacles, and for a long moment he did not know her, and then he knew her, and his mouth worked without sound. "Eleanor." "Mr. Dobbins." "My lord." "Eleanor Whitfield. I need 10 pounds of flour, 5 of sugar, a tin of coffee, 2 boxes of Winchester 4440 cartridges, a tin of yarrow salve if you have it, and a pound of hard candy for a child in Denver." The old man did not move. He stared at her. He stared at her for so long that she nearly asked again. But she did not. She let him look. She let him look at the woman who stood in front of his counter. "You are," he said finally. "You are." "Yes, Mr. Dobbins, I am." He went to the back of the store and began to gather the goods. His hands shook, but not from fear. From something else. He came back with everything on a sheet of brown paper. He tied it with string. He would not meet her eyes. She placed the money on the counter. Then she placed a gold coin on top of the money, a $5 piece. Gideon had given it to her from the pelt money. "Mr. Dobbins?" "Yes." "When I was 12 years old, my mother was sick. We had no money for tea. You gave me a quarter-pound of black tea on credit. I never came back to pay you for it. My mother died 8 weeks later. I am paying you now." She pushed the gold coin across the counter. "It is too much, Eleanor." "It is not too much. It is just about right. For a man who was kind to a child in a town that was not. Take it. Eleanor. Take it, Mr. Dobbins. The old man took the coin. He held it in his palm. A tear ran out of his left eye and went into the white of his mustache and was lost. Forgive me, he said quietly. For what? For all the times I saw them do it to you. And I did not stand up. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You were the only one who did not laugh. That is more than most. I came here today to thank you, and I have. She lifted the paper parcel off the counter. She walked out. The small brass bell rang again behind her. Across the street, Rufus Crane stepped out of the Copper Stag. He had seen her through the window. He stood on the wooden sidewalk with his yellow teeth and his narrow face and his thumbs hooked in his belt, and he waited for her to cross the street so he could say something he had probably been rehearsing the whole time she had been inside the mercantile. Eleanor did not cross the street toward him. She crossed the street directly toward him. She stopped 6 feet away. Well, look who crawled back down off the hill. He smiled the smile of a man who had never been told no by a woman his whole life. Mountain boy get tired of you already, Whitfield, or did you eat him? Behind her somewhere, Eleanor heard Gideon shift his weight on his horse, but Gideon did not move forward. Gideon had understood from the moment they had ridden into Bitter Creek that this was not his fight. She looked at Rufus Crane. She looked at him for a long time, and something strange happened inside her. She did not feel hatred. She did not feel rage. She felt instead a kind of quiet pity, because for the first time in her life she was seeing him clearly. She was seeing a small, thin, bitter man whose father had beaten him raw for 15 years. Everyone in town knew that she had simply never let herself remember it before. A small man who had learned in that house that the only way to feel tall was to make someone else feel short. A man who would stand on this porch for the rest of his life with his thumbs in his belt trying to feel tall. Rufus Crane, she said. Her voice was plain. It was not raised. It was not soft. I do not hate you. He blinked. What? I do not hate you. I pity you. 20 years from now you will still be standing on this porch. You will be older, and your teeth will be gone, and the men who laugh with you will be dead or gone, and you will still be standing on this porch waiting for someone weaker than you to walk by so you can feel like a man for 10 seconds. That is your whole life. That is what you have built. She took one step closer. Her voice did not rise. I am riding to Denver this week to help save a child from a man who is worse than you, because I have work to do in the world, because I have somewhere to be, because my hands, Rufus Crane, my large and ugly hands that you laughed at one night in December, are needed somewhere. She paused. I hope you live a long life. I hope you live long enough to understand what it cost you to never become a man. God bless you, Rufus Crane. I mean that. Nobody else ever will. She turned. She walked back across the street to her horse. Rufus Crane did not move. His mouth was open. His thumbs were still in his belt. One of his own men inside the saloon let out a single short laugh through the open door, and Rufus did not even turn to silence it. Across the street on the porch of the dressmaker's shop, Minerva Crane stood holding a wrapped bundle. She was looking at Eleanor. Eleanor saw it. Minerva's face was not angry. It was not smug. It was the face of a woman who had been hit last Tuesday and had covered the bruise with powder and was wearing a long sleeve to hide her wrist. Eleanor walked her horse across the street. She stopped in front of the dressmaker's porch. She did not dismount. She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded scrap of paper on which she had written. Before leaving the cabin that morning, a single address in case it was needed. She handed it down to Minerva Crane. If you ever decide you are done, Eleanor said, you come to that address. It is a day's ride north. You do not need a reason. You do not need permission. You only need to come. Minerva took the paper. She did not speak. She slid the paper into the cuff of her sleeve where her husband would not find it. Their eyes met. It was enough. Eleanor turned Juno. She rode back to where Gideon and Rebecca waited at the end of the street. None of them spoke as they rode out of Bitter Creek. The late afternoon light was long on the road. Behind them, the town went back to itself, but something in it had shifted, and every person standing on every porch knew it. That night, they camped at a bend in the Arkansas River. Gideon set the fire. Rebecca boiled coffee. Eleanor tended the horses. After supper, Rebecca slept her head on her saddle. The river moved in the dark beyond the firelight. Gideon came and sat beside Eleanor on her bedroll. He did not touch her. For a long time he did not speak either. Then he said, "What you did back there, in front of that saloon. Yes, that was not a small thing. It felt small, standing there doing it. It felt like the smallest thing in the world." "That is how all the large things feel, Eleanor. If they felt large while you were doing them, nobody would do them." She looked at him across the fire. His gray eyes were steady. "Do you want to go to your father afterward?" he said. "After Denver, after this is finished." "I will take you." Eleanor thought about it. She thought about Ezra, about the house at the edge of Bitter Creek, about the rattling lungs and the whiskey bottle and the note she had left under it in December. "Yes," she said. "I think I do. But not before Denver. Flora first. One thing at a time." One thing at a time. They sat. The river moved. A night bird called somewhere in the cottonwoods, and then was quiet again. Gideon did not reach for her hand. She did not reach for his. They sat 3 inches apart, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him through the wool of his coat, and neither of them moved those 3 inches closer. Because 3 inches in that moment was the exact distance that two people who had agreed to wait for each other needed to keep, and both of them knew it without saying it. The fire burned down slow. A log settled in its bed of coals. Up the slope a single pine creaked in the wind. Somewhere farther off an owl called twice and did not call again. Eleanor thought, without deciding to think it, that this was the first night of her life she had sat in the dark beside a man and not been afraid. Not of him, not of what he might want, not of what she might owe him in the morning. She closed her eyes. She listened to him breathe. That was enough. That would be enough for a long time yet. And when it was no longer enough, they would both know at the same moment without anyone having to say a word. They reached Denver on the 4th afternoon. The city was loud. Eleanor had not been in a place with more than 100 people since she was a child, and Denver had thousands. The horses flinched at the noise of the streetcars and the shouting newsboys. The three of them rode up 16th Street in single file, Gideon first, Eleanor in the middle. Rebecca last, her hair now braided and pinned under a plain bonnet, her face set. The federal courthouse on Arapahoe Street was a square sandstone building with a white clock tower. They tied the horses at the iron rail across the street. Gideon took the packet of documents from his saddlebag and handed it to Rebecca. "Your papers," he said. "Your hand carries them in, not mine, not hers." "I know. But we are behind you." "I know." The three of them climbed the courthouse steps. Marshal Oliver Hatfield was a tall man, 50 years old, gray at the temples with the straight posture of a cavalry officer and the tired eyes of a man who had seen much. He stood up when the three of them walked into his office. He looked at Gideon Mercer, whom he knew by reputation from 20 years of mountain talk, and he looked at Eleanor Whitfield, whom he did not know, but recognized as a woman who had come to tell him something true, and he looked at Rebecca Ainsley, whose husband he had disliked at 3 bankers' dinners over the years, for reasons he had never been able to name. "Ma'am," he said, "sit down." Rebecca did not sit. She opened the oilcloth packet on his desk. She spread the documents in front of him, the ledgers, the pages she had traced by hand through a sheet of carbon paper from Barrett's private ledger. 1 page at a time. 16 months of tracings done at his desk by candlelight while he was out at his club. The transfer orders, the War Department Colorado entries, the handwritten shorthand that only Barrett used. Oliver Hatfield read. He read for 20 minutes without speaking. When he looked up, his face had gone the color of iron. "Ma'am, my apologies for what I'm about to ask you, but I must ask it. Is this authentic? Every page. I can swear on a Bible in any court in this country. And you are willing to swear?" "I am willing." "Ma'am." "Yes." "Where is your daughter?" Rebecca's chin trembled once, only once. "He has her at the house on Grant Street. He has had her 6 days. He has told me he has 14 to send her to St. Agnes Reformatory in Missouri. I am here because I do not believe him. I believe he will send her tomorrow if he sees me in this city." Oliver Hatfield stood up from his desk. He walked to the door. He opened it. He spoke 1 sentence into the hallway. "Get me 3 deputies, and the writ, and the carriage." He closed the door. He turned back to Rebecca. "Ma'am, you will come with us. You will identify the house. You will identify your child. My deputies will be between you and your husband at all times. Do you understand? Yes. And you too. He looked at Gideon and Eleanor. You will stay in this office. I do not want a mountain man and a woman with a colt walking into a federal arrest. You will wait here. When I bring the girl out, I will bring her to you. Gideon did not argue. Eleanor did not argue. Eleanor reached into her coat. She took out the pound of hard candy she had bought from Mr. Dobbins in Bitter Creek. She set it on the corner of the marshal's desk. For the child, she said, when you bring her. Oliver Hatfield looked at the candy. He looked at Eleanor Whitfield. He nodded once. Then he was gone. The office clock ticked. Gideon stood at the window. Eleanor sat in the leather chair across from the marshal's desk. Outside, the late afternoon sun moved across the brick of the neighboring building. They did not speak. There was nothing to say that would not make the hour longer. At minute 43, they heard boots in the hallway. The door opened. A girl walked in. She was wearing a gray dress that had been washed too many times. Her hair had been cut short badly with kitchen shears. Her left cheek was bruised. She had a thin cut on her lower lip. Her eyes were too big for her face. She stopped in the doorway. She saw Eleanor. And Flora Ainsley, 11 years old, ran across the marshal's office, and she did not run to her mother, who was still downstairs giving her formal statement. She did not run to Gideon Mercer, whom she loved. She ran to Eleanor Whitfield, and she threw her small arms around Eleanor's waist, and she buried her face in the front of Eleanor's coat, and she began to sob hard, the kind of crying a child has been saving for 6 days. I prayed, she said, muffled against the coat. Every night, Miss Nell. I prayed you would come. I knew you would come. Eleanor held her. She did not speak. She held the child, and she looked over the child's head at Gideon Mercer by the window, and Gideon Mercer was crying quietly without shame, the way a man cries who had buried a 6-year-old daughter 7 winters ago, and had just watched another child not of his blood run to the woman he loved, and had understood in that moment that some things are not given back, but some things are given forward. He turned his face to the window. He wiped his eye with the heel of his hand. Eleanor placed her hand on the back of Flora's head. I am here, sweetheart. I am here. It is over. It is over. Rebecca came through the door 20 minutes later. She did not speak. She only reached for her daughter. Flora transferred from one pair of arms to the other like water. Eleanor stepped back to give them space. Gideon came to stand beside her. His hand in the shadow of the desk found hers. He did not squeeze. He only held. For the first time in their lives, they held hands, and neither of them let go. Barrett Ainsley was arraigned 2 mornings later on 16 counts of federal embezzlement and 1 count of felony kidnapping. He was remanded without bail. 3 months later, he was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 30 years at the Detroit House of Correction, the federal facility where white-collar criminals served long terms. He would die there of a stroke at 61 in 1902, and no one from his family would come to claim the body. But that was later. For now, Eleanor Whitfield had one more door to walk through in Bitter Creek. They rode down into the town on a Tuesday morning. Rebecca and Flora had stayed in Denver with Rebecca's sister, who had come down from Cheyenne. Eleanor and Gideon rode alone. She went to the house at the edge of town by herself. Gideon waited at the end of the lane with the horses. She opened the door without knocking. Ezra Whitfield was sitting by the window. He had a blanket across his knees. His hair was white. His hands trembled with age, not drink. The bottle was gone from the table. Eleanor saw that immediately. The room smelled of coal smoke and old bread, not whiskey. He did not turn his head when she came in. You came back. I came to speak. I am not staying. I know. She sat in the chair across from him. The sun came in through the window and fell across his hands. How long since you drank? 91 days. Not that it earns me anything from you. No, it does not. But I am glad of it. For your sake. They were quiet. Then he spoke. Your mother never loved me, Nell. I know. I read the letter. In the tea tin. He closed his eyes for a long moment. I knew the letter was there. She told me the week before she died. She said if Nell ever needs to know, it is in the tin. And I let her write it. I let her leave it there. Because I could not tell you myself. I was too much a coward. You knew about Jonah from the start. From before we were married. She told me. She said she needed a name for you. She said she would never love me. I said I would take that bargain. I was 27 and she was 19 and beautiful, and I thought I could change it. I thought if I loved her long enough she would love me back. She never did. And every time I looked at you for 27 years I saw him. Jonah, the man she actually wanted. And I punished you for being born Nell. I punished a child for being born. The room was very still. I am not here for your apology, Ezra. I know. But I accept that you have given me the truth. That is something. That is something you have not given me before. Yes. She stood up. She took from her pocket the small tin tea canister. She had carried it all this way from the mountain. She set it on the table beside him. This was Mama's. I have read the letter. I know what I needed to know. I do not need the tin anymore. I think it belongs in the house where she lived. I am leaving it with you. Not as forgiveness, as truth. Nell. Yes. You found them. The Mercers. One of them. A half-brother of Jonah's. He is a good man, Ezra. He is the best man I have ever known. I am glad. I am going to marry him. Ezra nodded. He did not speak for a moment. Then he said, Your mother would have been very proud of you, Nell, not for the marrying, for the standing up. She would have been proud of the standing up. Eleanor did not answer right away. Then she said, Goodbye, Ezra. She walked out of the house. She did not close the door hard. She did not close the door soft. She closed it the way you close the door of a room you are finished being inside of. She walked down the lane to where Gideon Mercer waited with the horses. He looked at her. All right. All right. He helped her up into the saddle. He swung up onto his own. They turned the horses toward the mountain. On the ride back, they stopped for a night at Twin Lakes under the east face of Mount Elbert. The lakes were still cold with snowmelt. The surface of the water held the image of the high peaks the way a mirror holds a face. Columbines and paintbrush had come up along the shore. The wind was warm for the first time that year. They made camp on the south shore. Gideon built the fire. Eleanor laid out the bedrolls 4 feet apart. After supper, the light went long and red across the water. Gideon stood up. He walked down to the water's edge. He was quiet a long time. Then he came back. He stood in front of her. In his hand was a small, twisted ring. He had made it, she could see, that afternoon while she had been bathing in the lake. It was braided from dry meadow grass, worked tight. At the center, held between 2 woven strands, was a small piece of amethyst, no larger than a pea, that he had picked up from the stream above the cabin 3 days before they left for Denver. He had been carrying it in his pocket all the way there and back. She looked at the ring. She looked at him. Eleanor Whitfield. Yes. I am 41 years old. I lived 7 years alone on a mountain before you walked up out of the snow. I do not know how to make a speech. I am not good with words that have not been used 1,000 times before me by men who knew less than I do. Gideon, let me finish. All right. Before you came, I existed. After you came, I have lived. That is the difference. That is the only difference that matters. I want to marry you, not because you need a name. You have a name. It is Whitfield, and it is Mercer, and it is enough without any husband's signature. I want to marry you because I need you to carry my name, so that if I die first, every man who ever asks this mountain who lived here will be told Gideon Mercer lived here, and his wife was Eleanor, and she was his, and he was hers, and that was the whole of it. He opened his hand. It is only a grass ring. There will be a silver one when we go back down from Mr. Dobbins. The grass is enough, Gideon. You will have me. I will have you. He slid the grass ring onto her finger. It fit. They did not kiss yet. Neither of them had kissed anyone in a long time. They did not know how to begin. Gideon simply put his hand against her cheek, and Eleanor closed her eyes and leaned her face into his palm. And they stood like that for a minute by the side of the lake with Mount Elbert white above them, and somewhere up the slope a single elk called through the trees long and low, and that was the sound of their engagement. They were married 6 weeks later at the cabin. Reverend Tobias Wainwright, a circuit preacher who came up the mountain 3 times a year, performed the ceremony under the 100-year-old pine behind the house. Rebecca and Flora came up from Denver. Marshal Oliver Hatfield rode the whole 4 days from Denver in his best coat. Mr. Dobbins closed his mercantile for the first time in 19 years and drove a wagon up with his wife Martha, who baked 4 pies. Minerva Crane came on her own on a hired horse, wearing a borrowed dress without her husband, and when Eleanor saw her at the edge of the meadow, she walked over and took her hand and led her to the front, and no one said anything about it, and Minerva never went back. Eleanor did not wear white. She wore the green dress that had been her mother's. She wore the silver oak leaf brooch at her throat. Gideon wore his best coat. Flora carried a bouquet of paintbrush and columbine. Rebecca read the book of Ruth. Whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. When she finished, she looked up and said quietly to everyone there and to no one in particular, "This is not only a wedding. This is the story of the women who chose each other, and the kind men who chose them." Gideon Mercer slid a plain silver band onto Eleanor's finger. Eleanor slid the grass ring which she had kept onto his little finger as a joke, and he laughed the full laugh this time, and everyone else laughed with him. They kissed. It was a clean kiss. A first kiss. A middle-aged man and a woman of 27 years, neither of whom had ever had anyone to kiss, learning the shape of a thing at the same time. When it was over, Eleanor looked out across the meadow at Flora chasing Juniper the fawn at Rebecca, with her hand on Mr. Dobbin's arm at Marshall Hatfield, quietly explaining something to the Reverend at Minerva Crane, standing alone at the far edge of the meadow, with her face turned toward the Sawatch Range, and Eleanor thought, "I have a family. For the first time in 27 years I have a family, and they are not all of my blood, but they are all of my choosing, and that is the better kind." The cabin was no longer only a cabin. Over 34 years, Gideon and Eleanor Mercer had added to it one room at a time until it had become a long, low building of joined timber with a wide porch on 3 sides. Around it on the meadow stood 4 smaller cabins. Between them ran paths of flat stone. Above the door of the largest building, carved into a plank of cedar, were the words, "The Cordelia House," and beneath those words, smaller, "A safe place for women and children." They had taken in their first woman in the autumn of 1887, 6 weeks after the wedding. Her name had been Minerva. She had stayed 7 months, and then she had gone to Cheyenne to teach school, and she had written Eleanor twice a year for the rest of her life. Rebecca Ansley had come up the mountain in the spring of 1889 and had never gone back down. She had built the second cabin herself with her own hands and Gideon's help, and she had lived in it for 32 years, running the daily work of the house. Flora had grown up between the 2 women, and Gideon Mercer had taught her the names of the stars and the tracks of the animals, and how to set a splint on a broken bone. She had ridden down to Denver at 18 and gone to the University of Colorado, and then to the Women's Medical College of Chicago. And she had come home a doctor in 1900, and she served the hospital at Leadville as chief of the women's ward for 20 years. 311 women and children had passed through the Cordelia House between 1887 and 1921. Eleanor kept a ledger. She wrote every name in ink. She never let one of them leave without pressing into her hand a small object, a brooch, a ring, a silver spoon, a book with the words, "When you meet a woman who has lost everything, you give this forward." On a warm afternoon in late July of 1921, a young newspaper writer from the Denver Post rode up the mountain to interview Eleanor Mercer for a series the paper was running on the pioneer women of Colorado. He arrived at dusk. The Mercers were on the porch of the main house. Eleanor was 62 years old. Her hair was entirely silver-bound in a long braid down her back. She weighed almost exactly what she had weighed in the winter of 1886. She had never cared to change it. Beside her in a second rocking chair sat Gideon Mercer, 76, his beard gone white, his hand resting on her hand on the arm of her chair. The young man sat down on the porch step. He took out his notebook. He asked his first question. "Mrs. Mercer, if you could say one thing to the young women who will read this article, what would you say to them?" Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. She looked out across the meadow. The sun was low behind the Sawatch Range. The light was long and red. Then she spoke. "I would tell them that the worth of a person is not in her waist, and it is not in her face, and it is not in the town where she was born. It is in the one who is willing to stand up for her, and in the one she then chooses to stand up for." She turned her hand over under Gideon's hand, and their fingers laced together. "A man stood up for me once in a saloon in Bitter Creek, in the winter of 1886. I did not know him. He did not know me. He stood up anyway. And then I stood up for a woman named Rebecca. And Rebecca stood up for her daughter Flora. And Flora, who is a doctor now in Leadville, stands up for 100 patients a week. None of us stood alone. That is the thing. That is the only thing. The young man was quiet. He did not write it down right away. He was learning at 23 years old that some sentences you write down after, not during. Eleanor Mercer and Gideon Mercer watched the sun go behind the mountain. Their hands stayed laced. Down below them in the meadow, a light came on in the window of one of the smaller cabins where a young woman who had arrived 4 days before was learning for the first night in her life what it was to sleep in a house where no one would come through the door to hurt her. The mountain held them all. The mountain kept them. And that was the end of the story, and also the beginning of every other one.